I directed the prison mental health program for all the state prisons in Massachusetts, and I directed the prison mental hospital for the so-called criminally insane, the violent mentally ill, over about a 15-year period. And everybody who committed a homicide or was arrested for homicide came through my hands at that point for a psychiatric evaluation. And my interest was to use the prisons as a kind of social psychological laboratory in which to try to learn as much as I could about the causes and prevention of violence. So I would ask people why they had killed somebody or why they had assaulted somebody. And to my surprise, they often would tell me. Sometimes they couldn't. The crime itself was their way of speaking. They weren't necessarily articulate. But when they were, they could give me a simple answer. Because he disrespected me, or he disrespected my wife, or my mother, or whoever. And they used that term so often, they abbreviated it into the slang term, he dissed me. And it struck me that any time a word gets used so often, it gets abbreviated, it tells you something about how central it is in the moral and emotional vocabulary of the person using it. I remember talking with one recurrently violent man who was driving the correction officers crazy because every time they would open his door, he'd come out swinging and attack them. And they put him in solitary confinement, and they turned off his light, and they took away his mattress, and he couldn't have visits, he couldn't have phone calls. I mean, they took away everything from him that they legally could. So finally they said, would I see him, because they didn't know what was going on. So I talked to this man who was usually so inarticulate that you could hardly get an answer to the simplest question from him. He was much more used to talking with his fists than with his mouth. But I asked him, what is it you want so badly that you're willing to sacrifice everything else in order to get it? Because it seemed to me that was exactly what he was doing. He'd sacrificed everything in his life. It was clear he'd be willing to go to his death if he had to somehow keep this war with the officers going on. Well, this guy, who, as I said, was usually inarticulate, surprised me by standing up tall and looking me straight in the eye and saying with a kind of simple eloquence, pride, dignity, self-esteem. He described how he was ridiculed, called names, laughed at by people, and he said, the only thing I got left is my pride. I have to have that. If I ain't got pride, I got nothing. And the way he maintained his pride was to refuse to become subservient and take orders. He had to proclaim his independence, his autonomy, that he would rebel and not submit. So at least we knew what to start with and in working with him. But I could tell you 100 stories on the same theme. I mean, this is something that just came over and over again. And I thought I had discovered something new and original. And then I reread a story of the first recorded murder in Western history, which I had never understood, never made any sense to me psychologically or in terms of motivation, why Cain killed Abel. Finally, when I actually was working with murderers, I understood it. It says it very clearly. It says, God had respect unto Abel and unto his offering, and unto Cain and his offering, God had not respect. And something that God dissed Cain, or Cain was dissed because of Abel, and he reacted exactly the way my prisoners in the prison had done when they felt dissed. And then I read further, and I noticed Aristotle noticed the same thing, that people become violent when they feel slighted, that is, treated as insignificant or unimportant. Thomas Aquinas noticed this. And then I noticed that I reviewed the contemporary literature. In every single branch of the modern behavioral sciences, people have come up with evidence of this same pattern. Experimental psychologists who want to elicit or stimulate violent behavior in an experimental psychology lab have reported over and over again that the most effective single way to stimulate aggression is to insult the person.